All right, we'll get started. All right, so welcome to another session. We're going to talk about enterprise architects for RISE. So maybe a quick show of hands. How many of you are customers? Okay, good. And how many of you run your solutions on RISE? Okay. How many of you are thinking about RISE? Okay, so good. So this helped me get oriented a little bit. Okay, I'll ask another shameless plug. How many of you were in my business suite conversations this morning? Okay, quite a few. So remember I talked about the Fosbury flop and the idea that somebody decided to completely change how people do high jumps, right? In the past, it was people would run straight up and try to do it a scissor or whatever straddle method it was called, till somebody then decided to say, I'm going to take a chance and run the other way and then bend over and go over the pole, if you will, right? Or the bar. And I did say what made him do that, right? It wasn't a new idea. That idea was always around. The problem was before Fosbury tried to do it, if you tried to do the jump the backward way, you would land on what was covering the ground, right? It was sand and wood chips and what have you. Probably not a great landing space, right? But when Fosbury tried to do this maybe a couple of years before the 68 Olympics, the invention of mats, the rubberized foam-based mats had already started, right? So he had a safer landing space to land on when he tried his unconventional idea and approach to high jump. So why is all this interesting? It's interesting because not only did he have the right idea, the timing was right, right? So we talked this morning about AI agents. You probably saw in the BTP conversation that, hey, it's not just SAP that can create AI agents. You can create your own AI agents, right? You can put them to work. You can put them to work probably way faster than you can train lots of individuals to handle disputes and customer interactions and what have you. There may be some learning gaps as you start. There may be some pains and what have you. But the timing for a lot of these transformational activities is here, right? The question now for all of us as an enterprise community is how do we take these innovation topics and make it the right time for your business, right? Because the challenge is never about SAP creating enough innovation ideas, right? Because we every year we churn out stuff, right? Lots of innovation, AI topics, integration, you name it, and we've got a whole list of things that we have curated based on business needs from our customers. Then we go to market with it, we have general availability, and then somehow customers still don't adopt it. So there's something going on, right? There's somebody who doesn't help translate what we gather from all of you as customers as a requirement that we go put it in a product, we release the product, and somehow it never makes it back to your business. So there's somebody who's got to help us with do all that, right? We need somebody who understands both from an SAP side, what is the innovation roadmap, right? And then that person needs to have solid grounding in understanding your business about why and how this innovation might fit in your business. Now, that person now becomes a partner to you to sort of translate and say, hey, remember 2 years ago you were struggling with these requirements. Guess what? It's on our roadmap. It's actually now available. And how do we now figure out how to take this to the business so we can actually implement and adopt it? That person is, in a nutshell, who the enterprise architect is going to be, right? So we're going to talk a little bit more about specifics of what is this. In short, I think last year at Sapphire, Christian Klein talked about how we want to support all of our customers who are on RISE with specific guidance around how do you approach transformation? What does clean core mean? How do you make progress on this journey in clean core? We talked about how do we adopt innovation and overall figure out how to get you to understand how do we capture value from the solutions we activate, right? So I think all of us have done business cases, correct? As part of some project or the other. We've done a business case. I would argue that for most of us, we've done a business case, we put the solution in, and we haven't gone back and checked the business case 6 months, a year later to see if the value that we were getting from the solution ties back to that business case we put, right? And 3 years later, we go ask for more money about an upgrade or some other thing. And then somebody says, well, I don't think I got value, right? So getting the value realization from the software is a big component for us, because now it's important for us that in the past, it was easier with our models where we said, hey, we give you an on-premise piece of software. You consume it the way you would like it. In the cloud paradigm, it's important that we see how you consume it. We help you to consume all aspects of the solution, and you're happy with the solution, right? And it doesn't happen if you don't get value out of it. So I've got a couple of colleagues, Raj here and Saurabh, who are going to help me with this topic today. We're going to do it a little bit different. We're going to have a couple of slides just to orient ourselves about what are we talking about. I probably talked a little bit about all of this already. Then we'll show you an SAP format of what is this, right? What is this role? How is this role going to help you? And then we're going to do some Q&A where the guys are going to talk a little bit about what is the actual role. And I've got several folks here in the room that are part of the team as well. And if you had specific questions, we can do some Q&A as well. Yeah. So if we go to the next slide, this is a little bit of maybe a journey map, right? So if you read this, and I think it's pretty obvious. I'm going to let you look at this for a second while I talk to it. We all know that there's increased complexity in the business. The enterprise architect, all of you in your business, you are the strategic partner between business and IT. You have to make sure that you're not just talking about technology, but you can actually connect the technology to the business outcome. That presentation that I did on Business Suite, if I was doing that to a group of business users, they would probably all walk out. Half of them would be asleep, or they would be on the phone, right? Because I don't think from that conversation they may have fully understood, well, what does the Business Suite do for me, right? So obviously, if the audience was a business user, I would have different slides and we would have a different talk track, right? But you get the point about the enterprise architect being that partner. You got to create that vision. You got to create that roadmap. Everything you saw this morning about the Business Suite, Business Data Cloud, it's important that from this event you go back and you have a translation of that, or you start thinking about that on how you take it to your own environment. We talked about how you need to have a mindset around clean core, and most of the time, and I've talked about this several times, people talk about clean core in the context of code. And we know that from an SAP standpoint, it's not just code, right? So we've got the 5 dimensions: the process, the data, extensions, integrations, operations. When you do all of these things in the right way, in a cloud compliant way, that's the idea of how you get to clean core, right? Not basically saying, hey, I reduced my RICEPs by 20% and I'm on track to doing clean core. That's not the intent. The intent is to saying, if you did create an extension or an interface, did you do it in a cloud compliant way? So the architect has got to help through that. Obviously, we talked about how, now especially with the innovation cases, how do you make sure that all of you understand how to use that innovation and where it maps to your business. And then we talked about making sure that we understand how to realize value. Who's got a value scorecard at your environment? Do you have a value scorecard? One person, 2, right? I would imagine the value scorecard allows you to understand a little bit about your benefits, what you get from the solution, right? But for most of our customers, we don't have value scorecards. We use the application and we get feedback. Feedback usually is how executives think about value, right? Enough people make noise about a process, value goes down. It has nothing to do with the solution, right? So how do we all get grounded on value becomes a key topic, and that's where SAP wants to help, right? So if we go to the next slide, this sort of orients you in what are the major areas we want to talk about and how this role is supposed to help you. you can see this. I mean, this is pretty obvious, right? Legacy structures. But for many of you who have made the RISE journey, you've moved a core piece of ERP onto S4. You might have a lot of legacy applications still floating around that you need to have a path for, right? So obviously figure out how to get to a simplified landscape, figure out how to get more consistent business processes, and figure out how to get you to innovation. So when we talk about the role, we talk about it in these 3 or 4 broad areas where the enterprise architect for RISE will help you, right? Become your partner in the orchestration of the transformation. We'll talk about what that means. Talk about the methodology for clean core, right? So how many of you heard about the RISE methodology for clean core? Quite a few of you, but some of you have not, right? It was very specifically designed so you get to some of those outcomes around clean core, the innovation path, all of those, right? And then if and when the architect on our side becomes a partner for all of you, then we all become trusted advisors to your leadership teams, right? That's the intent with the role. So the idea is to give you a little bit of more context about how does it really work? Who gets an enterprise architect, who does not, right? So the team is fairly new. I think we started last year on this journey. We're scaling. We've got maybe close to 800-900 RISE customers here in North America, right? And that's just US and Canada. The intent is finally to support every customer with architectural guidance from SAP. In our initial journey, we are assigning dedicated EAs to accounts that we are prioritizing. So eventually, for all of you here on a RISE journey, you will get an architect. We're also rapidly hiring. So if anybody is looking to do a transition, I'm here. We can all talk. But you might be also happy where you are, right? But just to give you an idea that we're scaling the team so that you get support. So what we wanted to do from here was do a little bit of Q&A. So I'm going to let Raj and Saurabh introduce themselves, and then we'll take a few questions, and then we'll take questions from the audience. Yeah?
Sounds good. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Ranjeet. You guys hear me okay? Okay, thanks, Ranjeet, for putting the perspective on a journey for an enterprise architect, right from challenge to success, right? Just from introduction perspective, my name is Raj Bansal. I am with SAP for about 10 years now, in SAP ecosystem for about 20 years. From last 10 years, I've been doing enterprise architecture work, but I've been recently more tuned towards the RISE EA role. And I am part of the global team working as a chief architect. So before I go ahead and describe the slide, maybe with a show of hand, how many of you guys have enterprise architecture practice in your current organization? That's good. That's a good sign. Yeah. So where I want to take this today, I think you guys have heard a lot about what we do from a role perspective, but how do you put this role into more realistic manner when you go and engage with a customer, right? So the way to read this slide is, what are some of the inputs we expect when we land in any customer? And the customers always have different starting points, right? And then what kind of activities we get involved with and what kind of outcomes we produce, right? And you see these different chevrons here. These are the typical outcomes which we are producing as part of the RISE EA framework, okay? I'll start from the left. As you can see, we talked about transformation roadmap, right? Now, it's not easy to just go and do a magic and produce a roadmap, right? Because I work with very large life sciences customers, and all of them, they are in a different journey already on their S4 transformation program. So when we get engaged, it's not to be disruptive, right? It's to help them accelerate to their journey to cloud, right? So what we do is we look at what they have today in their, because a lot of these customers, and I have seen time and again, they use a lot of these Visios and PowerPoints to store all the processes and enterprise architecture frameworks and things like that, right? Which is not very productive if you are trying to consolidate many ERPs into a single ERP. You got to digitize this journey, right? So that is how we start. We engage, we talk to them, we tell them what is out there, what we are offering from tools, methodologies perspective, which can accelerate your journey to cloud. Like for example, if I have to take an example, right? So we will go and ask very basic question. Do you have an L0 architecture, very high level architecture? If yes, that's good. That's a good input, right? For us to say that, okay, we have a tool called Lean IX, right? We have reference-based content, and we can bring that and bridge that gap and try to digitize, right, your journey. Similarly, right, what we do is we work with them to ensure that they can see this end to end, right? It's not about just having processes. Processes define your solution capabilities. Then you need to have an architecture which supports that. Then you need to have an execution tool, which is calm. If they all three work together, your journey becomes digitized. That's how we go and talk to our customers, right? In terms of RISE with SAP methodology, Ranjeet talked about, right? I think this is the core of what we deliver. The idea is we want our customers to consume our products as clean, as standard as possible. And this is not just contained towards RISEFs. I think there is a misconception, clean core means just cleaning your RISEFs, right? So now we have dimensions very clearly defined, from process to data to integrations, extensibility, and so forth, right? So we look at all those dimensions. We work with the customer to put guardrails around clean core and help them adopt, the methodology so that they can accelerate as well as they can do more cloud compliant, right, innovations in their architecture. The third pillar you see here is all about innovations, right? And with Joule and with BTP, I think the idea is for all our customers to consume as much as possible the innovation between BTP and Joule, right? Try to keep your transactional layer clean and do everything as part of BTP from extensibility, any app development perspective, and use Joule, which is our new UI, right, for our, your operational work, right? And this is another example I can quote. When I go meet our customers, most of them sometimes don't even know where to start. I'll be very honest. I know there are a lot of buzzwords, Gen AI, business AI, but they say, hey, I'm just trying to get to first S4. Then you talk to me about, innovation. And then, you got to, help them, build some use cases. You have to work with them so that they can see the benefit, right, of going to RISE and consuming these innovations. And the last thing is, as Ranjeet said, there is no program which is successful if you can't measure value, right? If you can't measure value, your investment you're doing is really not coming, in the front in terms of what you're achieving by invoking such a large program, right? I think that is where we help a lot with adoption plans, which we have. We have value scoring, as Ranjeet talked about. We enable all that for our customers so that they can measure, right, in different point in time throughout the journey, the success, okay, of their program.
So, this is a fairly broad scope, right? If you think about it, the idea with the enterprise architect is that this person is there with you as you go through your journey to RISE, right? They're trying to engage with you as early as possible so we understand where you're headed. And then they help you with the design process and they keep going as you realize the solution, and then even after that. Let me ask you another question though. Looking at how broad the scope is, we will have one individual, hopefully, right, who's an enterprise architect. How are they going to manage all these skills?
That's a great question.
Okay.
So it's kind of, we act like superheroes, but the idea is we have a large ecosystem behind us, right, from SAP perspective. For me, when I go to the customer, I'm the single point of contact. I'm the trusted advisor. And to be very honest, in our group, we have very seasoned consultants, right? If I ask myself, I have not just become an enterprise architect overnight, right? So my journey started with, I did consulting, I did implementations, I became a solution architect, enterprise architect. So to a certain extent, I can cover the end-to-end stack. But now if you need very deep understanding on certain things, let's say, for example, a customer wants to use Coupa instead of Ariba, right? Now that product has to integrate, right, with SAP. So I can tell them the best practices, but they need specific information. How do I connect? Then I bring my resources from the BTP practice, right? But it's like we are acting like an end-to-end architect for the customer for any questions they have. Yeah. Any examples you want to share, Saurabh?
Yeah, I mean, I think you had a good example. Like for instance, if the customer is interested in the integration strategy, so the RISE Enterprise Architect could provide an overall recommendations on what kind of integration strategy the customer should have, what components within the SAP integration suite could be utilized in customer's solution landscape. But then if they want to get into specifics and they want to have a detailed design around how do you integrate your Salesforce solution with your S4 solution, and they want to use SAP integration suite for that. And if you plan to have a workshop for that, so we're going to the RISE Enterprise Architect, who's your single point of contact, and they're going to reach out within SAP and look for that expert and bring in that expert who specializes in that SAP integration suite, and which will help you do that deeper dive to get to the desired design outcome. So that's how we're planning. So this person is a very seasoned person. They're going to be able to address a lot of your questions, provide recommendations and all that. But then once that deeper dive is necessary, they're also able to orchestrate and get that right person from SAP with those deeper skills and engage them as necessary.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think one other thing we wanted to do, Ranjeet, is we wanted to show some artifacts, right? We talk a lot about the delivery clusters, what we do, but we want to show you some examples. Maybe Saurabh, you wanna show, and I can help you with the slides. Okay, you're good. Yeah.
So the reason these deliverables were created was, if I came to you as an enterprise architect from SAP and said, hey, I'm here to help you with orchestration of your transformation roadmap, I'm here for helping you with clean core, innovation, etc., you'd be like, well, how specifically are you going to help me, right? Like, what exactly can you help me? Because I already have, the SI partners with me. Obviously, we have a very strong team, and we also have pre-sales colleagues from SAP who's already helping me, right? So one of the ideas was to give you better guidance on how can this individual help. It's not so much about the deliverables, right? It's not that I'm looking at the team and saying, did you do every deliverable to every customer? But this gives you a framework on how teams can start to work together. And a lot of times what we've found is that customers may not have the most updated, relevant data on everything that we are creating, right? So every time I go and talk to a customer about value and capability, you start talking about it through pain points, right? And then you talk about pain points through LOB solutions, as opposed to saying, let's break a process down and talk about business capability and process capability and so on, right? So a lot of that's now is what the team's going to show you, where some of those fit into your transformation roadmap and how you can take advantage of it, right? So a lot of that could be reference content that's relevant for you. And then you say, okay, that gives me a good starting point on how to drive it. So maybe, what would be the most relevant one that we would show from the first pillar?
Right. Yeah, I mean, before I get into the deliverables, let me start with some of the terms that kind of stand out. One is the transformation journey. Where do you start? Where do you end? Right? And the other word that's important is the early engagement. So the enterprise architect is going to engage very early in your transformation journey. And the enterprise architect will be helping with the orchestration of transformation roadmap. And these are some of the specific areas that they would be focusing on. So the first one, as you can see, is the business strategy map. And what this is get a deeper dive into your business strategy, which is an outcome of your overall business vision, short-term, long-term, some of the business challenges that you're facing, the market trends and all that. Because at the end of the day, your business architecture has to reflect your overall business strategy. So how to tie that out and to engage early in understanding that business strategy of yours. So that's very important. Second one I'll look at is yeah.
In that early part of the engagement, do you also do the benchmarking? I know when we did our strategy with you guys, there was a benchmarking which was very helpful in terms of the process and technology. Do you also have that artifact here?
Yes, I mean, so we're basically looking at the market trends. We're benchmarking with some of the leaders. Our group has access to all of that information about competition, what others are doing, what's making them more successful. So all those aspects are being taken into consideration when we're working on the overall business strategy map, because that's going to drive the rest of the transformation.
Yeah, and just to add to Saurabh, right, what you see here, this is from adopt. This is when you're adopting the software. What you're talking about, let's say you're trying to understand whether I go for this journey, right? During the select phase, we also support at that point, and we do all kind of benchmarking. The business value case, benchmarking, we work with our value engineering team, advisory architecture team to produce all artifacts for you.
Yeah, I think it's a good question, right? Because if you don't do the benchmarks, then when you get to the fourth part, which is about the value, you have a disconnect, right? So if you see, there's a topic there for the integrated tool chain, right? So when we talk about the integrated tool chain, we talk about LeanIX and Signavio and tools like that. So especially if you're running an SAP application, if you're running ECC as an example, and you're figuring out your journey to RISE, and also if you're running non-SAP solutions, there are ways that within Signavio you can run reports to get some of the benchmark data, right? So it'll break it down, like process insights if you've used. I'll break it down and it'll give you KPIs about how is your system performing relative to peers. It'll also tell you where is the innovation capability, then it'll make some recommendations, right? So you'll bring some of those back into that pillar one. Just because the integrated tool chain sits in two doesn't mean it's unique to doing things around clean core, right? But it also helps you in doing clean core because you may now have a good idea of your process map across your system. And now you can probably see how customized it is. So then you can action some of these things to the clean core. But oh, wait a minute. So if you had a very customized business process and you had many of them, that could also now become a business case on how you would drive the transformation, right? What strategies would now allow you to tie that transformation story relative to how custom your system is, right? So I think even though we have these deliverables sort of laid out against these four pillars, a lot of them are interconnected in the way you approach a transformation. So maybe we talk about the RISE methodology. How many of you have used a clean core quality gate? Okay. So maybe we talk about the clean core quality gate.
Yeah. So, in terms of clean core, one of the areas that the RISE enterprise architect is going to engage with the customers in terms of their transformation program is, first of all, would be the education. What are those 5 pillars? How do they relate to individual customers based on their requirements? And then provide that education around why that clean core is very important and what areas they need to improve. This would be followed by the assessment, the clean core assessment, which would SAP, they would utilize the standard SAP tools and dashboards to assess your data, your customizations, your code, your processes, your operations against those clean core standards, and then basically provide some kind of remediation to how to get that non-clean or unclean data or code to that clean core standard, so that you're ready for future adoptions of newer SAP technologies, right? So that's very important. Second of all, those Q gates that Ranjeet spoke about, establish those standards at each phase of the project of those clean core Q gates, so that that's where the benchmark comes into play, where you compare where you are versus where you need to be, and then do you check all those criteria, and can you move on to that next phase? So establishment of those Q gates for the clean core, and then also helping go through that process. So that's where the RISE enterprise architect will be very effective.
Yeah. And so I think what we started doing is also from our side, for every customer that is on RISE, we're starting to monitor your toolchain adoption, right? Not so much because you should have Signavio and LeanIX to do everything, but it sort of helps us orient how you might be tracking process, right? Do you have a process transformation, a process excellence office? Do you have a way to capture solution architecture, right? If it's only sitting in Visio, it might not be as useful then to make real-time changes to it from an integration standpoint or other interfaces to figure out what is the impact if you retire a system and so on, right? So the idea with this whole 4 pillars and having somebody help you from SAP is so that we can help you in your journey. So I'm going to pause and see if you all have any questions or not. Then we can talk a couple more topics here. All right.
How is this compared to the max attention TQMs embedded into the program already? And is this a paid service that the customers need to pay or not?
Right. So just to replay the question, how does this, I'm going to paraphrase, right? How does this compare to a max attention contract and you have what's called the TQM or the technical quality manager? And the second part of the question was, is this a paid service, right? So I think the second part is probably very easy to answer, which is it's not a paid service, right? There's no separate fee when you get assigned to a RISE Enterprise Architect. Obviously, we're in the phase of scaling the program, so you might, if you're on a RISE customer and you don't have an Enterprise Architect assigned, we have a model to figure out how do we get coverage fully by the end of this year for every RISE account, right? Now, if you come back to and say, what is the difference between a TQM and a RISE Enterprise Architect, right? So it's not just the TQM that you get in the Max Attention program, right? You get services from your Max Attention, and it's also not the only role with some technical content and knowledge that you interact with, right? So there's also pre-sales enterprise architects that you deal with as you're looking at software. There's a cloud architect from an RISE standpoint. So there are multiple roles that within SAP you already engage with, right? But if you specifically take about the TQM is the colleague who orchestrates lots of deliveries of the Max Attention services, right? The starting point for some of those might be a RISE Enterprise Architect who's talking about data volume optimization. Let's say you have lots of data. Or if you have an integration issue, the RISE Architect is talking about what is the integration methodology, right? So let's say you want to go and consume more APIs, right? So that conversation starts with the RISE EA educating you about what is the Discovery Center, what's an API hub, how do you look at some of those and figure out if that's relevant for the process. Now, you may get to the point where you might say, I think some of these topics make real sense to me, but I want to get into tailoring this specifically for my environment so I could retire half of these interfaces and go to APIs. Now, at that point, you probably need a larger team to sit down and analyze all of that, right? So at that point, we would bring the TQM into the conversation and say, we probably need to do a design review or a design session as part of the Max Attention service, right? So it's going to be a close collaboration between a TQM and a RISE EA as we get into every account. The Enterprise Architect will take you to that point where you have enough information where you say, I need help from SAP, either through Max Attention or through consulting, or you might go to an SI, right? So that's how you would handshake between, let's say, a RISE EA and Max, or then you bring in, your own consultants who might help you.
And maybe just to add to Ranjeet what you just said, I have a recent one incident where we were trying to talk about integrated tool chain. Customer was invested in solution manager, and we were talking about COM. At that point, we had to bring Max guys to help them with that analysis, right? Just to give you an example, how a RISE EA interacts with Max.
I'm glad that you brought up the topic of solution manager and COM. There are certain functionalities that solution manager used to have now been transformed or being a part of the scenario suite, because of which earlier all those functionalities used to be unknowingly be free, now became paid. So that's a small pain point problem, and that could be addressed later.
Okay.
Sure.
All right. Was there another question?
Yeah. Do you have to be on RISE for it to be available?
Do you have to be on RISE to be assigned a RISE Enterprise Architect or an Enterprise Architect for RISE? I would say for the most part, yes, right? So I think what we are doing is to make sure that a lot of times when customers are trying to go to RISE, somebody will pitch you the value prop for RISE, right? And as part of that journey, you're also a little bit confused about, well, who does what when I get to RISE, right? So that's one of the pillars in that RISE adoption framework. We call it the Cloud ERP adoption framework, right? So it is more beneficial in that journey for the enterprise architect to give you a lot of guidance. Now we are seeing where if you're a potential RISE customer, would you get a RISE EA? The answer would be, that would be great, right? So I think the goal for me and our whole organization is to figure out how to also support RISE journeys, right? But what we are saying is, for the most part, if you saw Jason Porterfield talk this morning, he has a team of what's called architect advisors. They're pre-sales architects. For the most part, they would engage first because you're in what we call the discovery phase and the selection phase of the software, right? At that point, we would have an enterprise architect for RISE informed of the conversation, but we may not have a dedicated person assigned to it. At some point, if we had the full scale, we would make sure that what we are saying during the sales cycle gets connected and translated back when you actually get onto RISE. But we're not there at that scale yet, right? So today we are having the pre-sales colleague take the first steps to talk to you. And then obviously, once you're on RISE, you would be assigned an enterprise architect. Does your migration have to be complete? Not necessarily, right? So we've got, in fact, we have, I think the most influence the enterprise architect could have is just as you sign the deal, right? Because now you're sort of saying, I mean, I had a conversation with the Microsoft guys where they were wondering how long it takes for the software to get consumed so they could see the lights glow up on their storage and compute. And they were sort of puzzled at why is this not happening as soon as the deal is signed, right? And I was like, okay, there's a process. We signed the deal. A lot of our customers have to go figure out an SI. There's an RFP process. It takes time, right? So sometimes the sweet spot for several of these cases is as soon as you've signed it, we assign a RISE EA, and then that person helps you in your journey. 2 questions in the back.
So what is the value proposition you talked about that for somebody who's already on S4 on a private cloud to move to RISE?
Good question, and I don't know if you all heard, and I'm going to take some of these and then I'll give it to you for the hard questions. But the question was, I'm already on S4 and I'm live. What's the value prop for me to get to RISE on private cloud? Yeah? Different question, right, than the EA role. The question is, the value proposition is about the reference architecture that we bring together with RISE, right? We've also said strategically the innovation that we drive with AI and BTP is only available if you're on RISE. It makes it easier for us to deliver and to maintain those if you're on RISE, right? So it's a broader conversation, not specifically tied to the enterprise architects for RISE, but we can definitely have a much longer conversation about if you're on RISE and you're on a hyperscaler on-premise, what's the value prop for you to go to RISE, right? A lot of it is around the reference architecture we've created, how we deliver RISE to customers. There are also TCO benefits. Obviously, we're also saying you don't need to be in the business of maintaining your system if there are higher value things that you can do, especially around AI and things like that, right? So we're trying to take you away from having to maintain your system and have a lot of focus on the IT side of it than to saying, can we do more high value things? Imagine if I could free up most of your resources to think about what agents you could create to create automation and intelligence. Then having somebody actually told me they have a team of people who just watch bad jobs. How crazy is that? Even today, right? They don't have an intelligent automated batch monitoring system. They have people who watch because those jobs are critical. I get that, but that's how we used to do it, 40 years ago? But if these people could get freed up, and if we could have better monitoring for you with things like business process monitoring, then that would free you up, right? So there's a bigger conversation to be had about the RISE TCO. Okay, one more?
I know you mentioned already, 13,000 or so customers on BTP and RISE. And how's the timeline look like when we will have all EAs assigned to the customers on RISE like us?
Yeah, I like your number with the 30,000. I don't know if that. Okay. So I think there are several thousand, I think 7,000 customers, I think globally on RISE. I think the BTP number are probably close to what you described. Within North America, we've got 700-800 customers, right? So I think we are looking at this from a segmentation standpoint about the larger customers and then the very small customers with individual systems and so on, right? So right now the focus is to look at how we prioritize accounts which have the most critical needs, right? A lot of times it tends to be complex engagements. My goal is that by the end of the year, getting to next year, that we would cover all of the RISE accounts here in North America. So if you are in a smaller environment, I would expect a little bit more patience. But if you are running a large environment, we've assigned, I think several of my colleagues are already here who have already been assigned to customer accounts. So there you go. Richard's already on an account. And so are these guys too, right? So, but yeah, the short answer is hopefully by the end of this year, tops by Q1 next year. Okay, other questions? I think we're... Yes, sir.
Yeah, these deliverables from the EA, but we don't see much of these deliverables included in the Activate Discover phase at all. When you look at Activate, which is the most, people adopting it. So most of this, I believe, it's coming in the discovery phase, right? So, but we don't see any of these mentions about this business, any of this from the Metro Map, as one of the items to be included in the Activate. So that's why I see a lot of disconnect when people already start on Activate, go into the solutioning mode, and then they look at EAs and look at where do we fit them in the overall spectrum, right? So why is that missing in the Activate roadmap is one question. I have another question, but I will park it for later. But this is my burning question for a long time.
Yeah, and so the Activate is a project methodology, right? So we talk about the explore, the prepare, the so on and so forth, right? It's very specific to how do we deliver the project. It assumes that you have signed the deal and now you need a mechanism to deliver the project. You can say that some of these deliverables are relevant, right? And we will tie these into the Activate methodology. We also have what we call the customer value journey, which is different than the Activate methodology, right? The customer value journey talks about the stages of your life cycle as you consume software, right? Discover, select, adopt, derive, and so on and so forth. So we do have two topics, and then we have what are the deliverables for the RISE EAs. The goal is that we harmonize these so you don't sort of say, hey, how does this deliverable fit into the prepare phase, as an example. So it's not there yet, but I think it's a good call out.
Activate could be more for SIs to follow. Right?
It is true. That's where problem is people, they start the journey fast enough without even looking at any of the reference architectures or any of the content. And then when EA space comes in, they've already started adoption in a lot of ways, and then it's too difficult to actually fit in.
See, that is the reason I think that early engagement is required.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, that's the biggest reason. And this RISE with SAP methodology is nothing. It's just an addition on top of Active.
Agreed.
Also, in one of the previous slides, it may be incidental or it is already covered. One of the things is, as a tool set, you actually called out LeanIX, but not Signavio specifically. In one of the previous slides. I don't know the reason, but you did mention about the business process hierarchy and the process maps and so on. So there is a lot of time, the same so-called visuals of the world, PowerPoints of the world, disconnected from what is running in the backend systems. And the Signavio and LeanIX combination getting connected back into the backend systems is something not well enough highlighted from SAP. This is a personal, I would say, a burning passion for a long time. Only the integrated toolchain concept is coming up from SAP off late, like 3 years maybe at the most.
Right. So and the integrated toolchain has got Signavio, it's got LeanIX, it's got WalkMe, it's got Calm. And so the idea is that, right, so we'll transition from some of the learning topics more to WalkMe, right? So are we on time?
I think we're late.
Okay. So I wanted to thank you all. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Saurabh, for giving us some of your insights into the role. If anybody wants to talk more detail, we are here. And thank you again. And have a good week.